Inflation won. It just hasn't admitted that yet. It's still pretending. The Fed is still pretending that it won. It didn't even come close to winning. It's already surrendered. The markets just haven't figured that out yet. But at some point, they're going to realize that that white flag has been waving, and that is bullish for gold. Higher inflation is always bullish for gold, especially when the Fed can't do anything about it. Their hands are tied behind their backs. In fact, before too long, probably during the Trump administration, the Fed is going to have to fess up and say that it's willing to accept higher inflation, that that's just the price we have to pay to stimulate the economy, to deal with the debt, to whatever. It's going to come up with an excuse. I don't know if it's going to raise its official target to 3 or whatever it's going to do, but it is going to be cutting rates. It is going to be doing quantitative easing, even as the inflation numbers move further and further north of 2%. And in fact, we got numbers on Thursday for jobless claims that unexpectedly shot up from 225,000 last month to 242,000. Last week to 242,000 and in the last week. And the 4-week moving average jumped up from 218.50 to 224 and a quarter. This is the highest number of claims we've had in a while. And again, could be the beginning of a big trend on increasing unemployment. And so, the economy is weak. Again, the weak economy is the reason that Trump was elected. And that weak economy that got Trump into office is going to continue while he is in office. And the tax cuts may stimulate consumption, but they're not really going to stimulate the underlying economy. Meanwhile, Wall Street is celebrating. Donald Trump went down and rang the opening bell with his beautiful wife, Melania, who, she's 54. She looks fantastic. So, that sends a good signal, I guess, to everybody that there's a lot of beauty after 50 in modern women. But he was there with her. I think R.F. Kennedy Jr. was there with him. I forget the rest of the entourage that came down to the New York Stock Exchange, but they're all excited because, he's so pro-business. Well, he was pro-business when he was president the last time. That was the whole reason that everybody elected him. He was a businessman. He wasn't a politician. So is he more pro-business now than he was when he was elected the first time? No. I mean, maybe some of his cabinet people are a little less the establishment. They're very successful business people on their own right. But this is not a 180-degree change. Yes, we're going to have fewer regulations. Maybe we'll repeal a lot of the regulations that were put in place by Biden. But even if we go back to the regulations we had under Trump, we still had a lot of regulations under Donald Trump. But the bigger issue, the ticking time bomb, is not going to get diffused. This deficit is exploding out of control, and the economy is on the verge of a severe recession, in part caused by the backup in interest rates. And interest rates are rising. I mean, even though the NASDAQ hit another new record high today, the Dow was down for the second consecutive week. The markets maybe are starting to take notice of rising bond yields again, rising mortgage rates again. And the economy, the data is not good. I don't know what people are looking at to keep talking about the fact that we have strong data. In fact, the Fed must even know this. That's why they're cutting, right? They know that the economy is weak. They just want to continue to pretend that it's strong. So here's a great little story here. So I read about a meeting that took place, I guess, the other day. Scott Bessent, who is Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of the Treasury, met with the current Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen. And apparently, Janet Yellen told Scott Bessent that she was sorry that her administration was not able to make more progress on reducing the deficits, especially given the fact that interest rates have moved up, right? Oh, so she's sorry, right? I mean, that like that's going to make it better. I'm sorry. I think the nation deserves a more profound apology than just like sorry. And of course, if you think about how long she's been involved in this, from during the years she was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and then the years that she was the Secretary of the Treasury, during those years, we added like 15 trillion to the national debt. I don't even know if there's any other person that can claim to have been responsible or have overseen 15 trillion. I mean, other than the members of Congress, of course, some of these guys have been there their entire lives, so they've overseen the whole thing. But if you figure her position as Fed chair as a massive enabler by keeping interest rates at practically zero for the entire time she was Fed chair. I mean, one of the reasons that we have so much debt and we're now so vulnerable to rising rates is because she kept rates at zero for so long, allowing the government to finance all this debt short term at low rates and thinking it was no problem. In fact, when she became Treasury Secretary, she continued the process. And even though she had the opportunity to try to lock in longer duration bonds at low rates, she decided as Secretary of the Treasury to keep issuing short-term paper, knowing that interest rates were going to rise. In fact, I pointed this out on my podcast. Nobody else in the mainstream media did, which is why you don't have to watch the mainstream media. I just watch it to see the stuff they get wrong, and then I tell you the stuff that's right. But what Janet Yellen said in response to a question about the debt, she was asked, are you worried about the national debt and the size of the debt? And she said, no, I'm not worried at all, because the key is the financing costs. And interest rates are really low, and so it doesn't cost us a lot to finance the debt. And I said at the time, yes, but interest rates aren't going to stay low. In fact, the Federal Reserve just told you they're going to start hiking to fight all this inflation that you helped create. So she specifically said the debt isn't a problem because rates are low. And now she's apologizing for not doing more about the deficit, especially since rates have gone up. Well, duh, we knew they were going to go up. She knew they were going to go up. I don't even think, sorry doesn't cut it. I mean, when you do this intentionally, she owes a lot more than that half-assed apology for the part that she played in this disaster. But I also want to talk about Trump again. I mentioned this on the Tuesday podcast, and I mixed up the name. I said Face the Nation. Trump was on Meet the Press. Some of you pointed that out in the comments, and so I thank people for that. But he was on Meet the Press. I already went over the big lie that is getting no coverage in the media, where Trump said that not only was there no inflation when he was president, but inflation was so low, he did such a good job of having no inflation, that Biden enjoyed a ride on his coattails, and that there was no inflation under Biden either for the first year and a half, almost 2 years he was president, which was an outright, well, it may not be a lie because maybe Trump has no idea what inflation was like under Biden. I mean, maybe he's that clueless about what's actually happening in the economy and doesn't really know anything about inflation or economics. And so it's not a lie if you think it's true, because nobody's ever pointed out the facts. I mean, I have no idea which one it is. But I pointed out that the highest year of inflation under the Biden administration was 2021, his very first year. It was like 7.5%. The second worst year was the second year. So during the 2 years when Trump said we had hardly any inflation or no inflation, we had the worst inflation. But I want to dissect it a little bit more to show you how the trends built up, because inflation works with a lag. So if we had a lot of inflation in 2021, the seeds were sown in 2020 or earlier when Trump was the president. Now, we had massive deficit spending under Trump. We had massive money printing under Trump, and the effects of that manifested under Biden. Now, Biden made it worse. And in fact, a lot of the Biden inflation is going to show up on Trump's term, right? That's going to, when inflation really skyrockets next year, that's not Trump's fault. It'll be his fault later on. But, he's inheriting an inflation problem from Biden, just like Biden inherited an inflation problem from him, right? But he's trying to sell the country on the lie that we had no inflation when he was president. And now that we've reelected him, it'll disappear again and we'll have no inflation. That is completely wrong. So if you look at the last 2 years of Trump's term, which was December of 2020 and January of 2021. I mean, he left office on the 20th of January. So I'm going to give Trump the January and December numbers. The CPI rose by 0.4 in December and 0.3 in January. Annualize that, that's 5% inflation during his last 2 months in office. that 5% annualized rate of inflation is higher than the whole year inflation for 2023 and 2024, right? The years that Trump says we had high inflation, those are the 2 years that it was lower than it was when he left. But if you want to take a few more months, because Biden didn't do anything until the big stimulus package was passed on like March 20th or something, or March 15th. I forget the exact date. They passed the stimulus. But most of the money didn't go out until April. I mean, there were some direct deposits that were made in mid to late March, but a lot of people got mailed checks, and some of the checks didn't even get mailed till April. And you know how slow the mail is. So certainly whatever happened in February and March had nothing to do with Biden. I mean, maybe we could say April because some of the money was out by April, but a lot of it wasn't even spent. Remember, when a lot of people got their stimulus money initially, it just went into their bank accounts and the savings rate went way up. So a lot of people didn't even spend it in April. But I won't put April on Trump because PPI went up by 0.8 in April. That was a really, really big jump. But in February, consumer prices were up 0.4. And in March, right, before any of the real stimulus took hold, they were up 0.6. So if you take the last 2 months of the Trump administration and the first 2 months of Biden, before Biden actually had an opportunity to affect any change, and you annualize those 4 months, you get 5.22% inflation. Again, that's worse than the rate last year. That's worse than the rate this year.